Hey y'all, today I'm going to be talking about the history of ayahuasca. More specifically, I'm going to get into the history of the Western perspective on ayahuasca and the gradual contact that it has had with the mainstream. Everything leading us up to this current day, where there are now hundreds and hundreds of ayahuasca centers where people can go and drink the sacred brew of the Amazon. Ayahuasca, broadly defined as a DMT containing plant with an admixture of an MAOi so that you can orally ingest the DMT, is the most broad definition of ayahuasca possible. There are definitely thousands of other mixtures and types of plants used, as well as other admixture plants that they throw in there. Ayahuasca can mean a lot of different things, but in general, we'll talk about it in simple terms. The other reason I mentioned that was that I was looking for the earliest possible evidence that we have of ayahuasca, because this issue comes up and I read an article about it. It was basically asking the question, how old is ayahuasca? You have people going around saying this tradition is thousands of years old, it goes back millennia, but if you look at it, we only really have proof going back a few hundred years. So I wanted to find out what all the information was about this, so that's what I'm sharing with you. So I decided to start with the very earliest evidence that we have for ayahuasca, or possible evidence I should say. There was an archaeological discovery in South America that dated to 1000 AD. So what they found was actually a pouch that must have belonged to some kind of shaman character, because the pouch had various psychoactive substances inside of it, and two of the things that they found happened to be DMT and a cappy vine, or it was an MAOi, which are the two ingredients that you need for ayahuasca. So the evidence for that is not conclusive, because it's also very likely that those two ingredients were actually some of these snuff powders that you inhale through the nose. It could just be a coincidence that one had DMT and one had cappy, but on the other hand, it could be the earliest possible evidence we have of the knowledge of the ingredients of ayahuasca, which would date it back 1000 years at least. The earliest accounts that we have of ayahuasca dates back to the 1600s. It was a few Jesuit priests who traveled to the Amazon who first described ayahuasca in their accounts. However, they spoke down on ayahuasca and talked about it like it was this evil sorcery or some primitive ritual, and they didn't take time to understand it whatsoever. So with this being our earliest evidence, that dates ayahuasca to be at least 400 years old, if not more. I think it's pretty safe to say that they were probably using it for at least a little while by the time the priests encountered them. So in the 1730s and 1750s, we have more accounts from more Jesuit priests about ayahuasca and the plants that they use. They actually wrote a lot about the cappy vine, which is used, and they wrote about it in great detail, calling it a plant of interest. However, they still looked down on ayahuasca as a form of sorcery and witchcraft, and they were still blinded by their Eurocentric views. The first published and positive account of ayahuasca came in 1858 from Manuel Villavicencio. He was of a mixed cultural background because he received what was a culturally European education, but he was born in Ecuador, so he actually valued the practices of the native people and taking ayahuasca. So he described his experience in his writings. So this would have been the late 1800s. He said, when I drank ayahuasca, my head immediately began to swim. Then I had seemed to enter a flying journey, wherein I remember seeing the most delightful landscapes, great cities, lofty towers, beautiful parks, and other gorgeous things. So Manuel was the first person to realize that ayahuasca was not actually witchcraft, and it was a very valuable part of indigenous society in the Amazon. Also in the 1800s, the cappy vine used in ayahuasca was collected and recognized by Richard Schultes, who is a pretty famous botanist from England. He sent some samples back to England, but actually due to some unlucky circumstances, the samples went bad. So we actually wouldn't hear much about ayahuasca for another 100 years. So the beginning of our understanding today starts in about 1941, where Richard Schultes, a professor from Harvard, Richard Schultes lived in the Amazon with the Kofan people, and he carefully studied their use of ayahuasca for several years. You can't really overstate how important Richard Schultes is to our modern conception of all of this. This guy was like a real-life Indiana Jones. Richard Schultes also partook in the ceremonies, which would have looked a lot different back then than they do now. Schultes was also a huge influence to Terence and Dennis McKenna. Schultes was also the person who wrote accounts of the little people having to do with the Witoto tribe, and this was from them using their DMT containing snuffs. They talked about little people, and that resonated with Terence McKenna, and that's the reason he went to the Amazon with Dennis and had this experiment at La Chorrera. So I think it's just interesting how that's all connected. And in general, Schultes brought scientific attention to ayahuasca. Schultes was actually influenced by Richard Spruce, the guy from the 1800s, and read his stories as a child. So another pioneer in this field was a woman named Esther Jean Langdon, and she did a lot of her work starting in the 1970s, which really helped us have a bigger picture of shamanism and kind of helped us get out of the box in our thinking about what shamanism was. She helped to define shamanism as a cosmological system, so like an entire worldview that incorporates how they see the universe. It incorporates parts of their social lives and medicine, and they use it to have a good hunt in the next season and predict things and events. So she helped us to kind of understand how ayahuasca fits into all of that in their worldview. She really helped to expand our definition of shamanism to something that was less static and defined and rigid, and helped us kind of see how so many tribes and cultures do it in all of their various ways. So in 1984, scientists confirmed that the MAO inhibitors were the things in the ayahuasca that were allowing the DMT to be orally active, and Terence McKenna popularized this idea. It brings up an interesting conflict of ideas because from the Western perspective, it would be the DMT that is the main attraction, and the capi vine is the helper plant that helps bring out the DMT. But interestingly, from the indigenous perspective, it's the opposite way around, where the capi is really the main plant and the DMT is the helper plant. So that's pretty interesting. So that actually brings up another interesting topic, which is this idea of how did these people in the Amazon figure out what plants work together? This is something that a lot of people reiterate, including Terence McKenna, and the idea is that how out of thousands and thousands of plants in the rainforest did they know that you could combine these two and it would create such a powerful experience? And some of the shamans themselves claim that this is what the plants told them, and that the plants taught them how to use this specific mixture. So the rebuttal to that would be that they already knew the properties of DMT thousands and thousands of years going into the past, at least 1,000 years, right? And that it was just a matter of trial and error and having medicinal knowledge of the plants that worked for other things. So it's probably just trial and error, and after generations and generations of doing that, then you get to where we are now. One genius in the generational line can really advance these types of knowledge a lot. So just imagine what generations of that could do. It's still really brilliant what the natives were able to do, creating so many admixtures and discovering all these properties. Terence McKenna really started to popularize ayahuasca in the 90s, and that really set the stage for our current day of ayahuasca tourism. In 1991, the Peruvian shaman Pablo Amaringo published a book called Ayahuasca Visions, which feature a lot of his art that famously depicts the themes and motifs and colors of an ayahuasca experience. And he also talks a lot about the culture and ceremonies that go behind it. And his work has helped to inspire a new generation of visionary artists and a new style of depicting visionary experiences, especially of ayahuasca. So according to Dennis McKenna, the nature of tourism has drastically changed how an ayahuasca ceremony looks. Because apparently back in the day, like I was saying with Richard Schultes, it was rare for someone like him to participate in the ceremonies and actually drink the brew. And because of the rise of tourism, it's become so much more in demand that you actually drink the brew. And as Dennis pointed out, like, would you pay thousands of dollars to fly to South America and watch somebody take ayahuasca? Like, no, you're going to want to take it. And in the past, it would have been the shaman who just drinks it and downloads the visions and does the curing on you. So the modern landscape of ayahuasca is huge and growing and an extremely mixed bag. There are now hundreds of these centers for people to go and take ayahuasca where it's legal. There's even 2 ayahuasca churches in the US, and it's become such a popular thing that it's not uncommon to hear about like a CEO of a big company to go down and take ayahuasca, or Hollywood celebrities or mainstream famous type people are hearing about this experience. And it's just interesting that why of all psychedelics would ayahuasca be the thing to just take people by storm? And maybe it has something to do with just the mythopoetic quality of drinking a sacred brew in the rainforest and that whole experience that you get with that, and just the fact that it's like some kind of magic potion almost, which it's not. It probably also has something to do with the purge that's associated with ayahuasca. I feel like you get a lot out of it because of the whole nausea and diarrhea purge that you have. There's that spiritual cleansing aspect to that, so that's probably another factor, which to me should make it more unattractive, but it seems just like it's the real deal. The current ayahuasca tourism landscape is definitely a mixed bag. You have some really great healers out there, but then you also have con men and con women and just people who are fake shamans basically, and they have malicious intent. And then there's a lot of sexual abuse and stuff like that, which seems to be a problem across the board with all kinds of religious posts and gurus and people in power. It seems like no matter what, even if you drink the sacred brew ayahuasca, if you're an asshole, you're going to be an asshole. So I think it's important that we really do a lot of research before just going to any retreat and making sure it's all safe and legit and there's no history of the abuse of power or just getting ripped off. But on the positive side, you can see ayahuasca almost as if it's this plant ambassador from the plant kingdom, and it's telling us, here's how you can realign yourself with the natural environment. And the ayahuasca visions seem to pertain heavily to this large scale view of the earth and the delicate balance of nature and how we're affecting that negatively, and how we need to really align our intent with what's good for the biosphere. It's helping us stop destroying the ecosystem and seeing that we're a part of nature and healing our personal issues and traumas along the way. Although the medical approach to ayahuasca and psychedelics in general is good to help convince skeptical people in the Western world that psychedelics and things like ayahuasca are legit, but it's important that we don't ignore the multitude of indigenous perspectives and all the wisdom that they have, since they're the ones that we are drawing all of our wisdom from. They are like the scientists of the plant world. This includes seeing nature as your guide and opening yourself to the possibility of receiving the wisdom in these plants. To quote a Shipibo shaman named Soy, "The healer is just a guide. He tells the plants, do it there, cure there. The plants open the body and spirit, creating space for cleaning and the extraction of less healthy energies, like washing the interior of your car, but on a spiritual level." So we need to listen and preserve these type of perspectives, because it could be crucial in helping to actually heal humanity at large. It's worth pointing out because you could say the Shipibo tribes and people like them have found what we desperately lack in the Western world, a balance with the natural world and the happiness that comes from that. One of the authors on a book about ayahuasca had this to say about this dynamic. Shipibo people are more prone to joyful experiences and worry less. No matter what hardship comes their way, the Shipibo are always held by a community, a tribe, and a natural world, so they tend not to have the low-level anxiety that rips through modern Western life like the constant hum of a nearby interstate. Dang, that's true. So let's hope that we can take these lessons to heart, the lessons we get from the native people and from the plant wisdom itself. And let's also work together to make sure that we keep other people in the community safe and help look out for bad actors and people who are scammers, essentially. Let's try our best to avoid the exploitation and abuse of indigenous cultures, and let's also try to make sure we don't over-harvest ayahuasca. I still haven't tried ayahuasca, but I'm insanely curious, and I'm really fascinated by the whole idea of Icaros, the songs that they use to modulate the visions. So I'm definitely going to be investigating that in the future, and when I do, you'll definitely be hearing about it. So that's going to be it for this one. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts and if you've had any ayahuasca experiences, and I'll see you later. Peace.